Well, cut that short because that's not working well. Hopefully everybody can hear me this now. I've restarted the show 15 minutes late because of technical glitches. The first thing appears my Ethernet cable had been unplugged. Anyway, hopefully we are now live and on air. So what I've got for you in today's show, again we have some interesting news, sad news from Finland and from Snetterton, where 2 motorcycle riders have sadly been killed. We also have news from the government have been told to curtail road building events because the climate change issues. We have news from Toyota about a new battery. If it does, it's proved to be a success, could halve costs of batteries and speed up topping up as well, and improve range. So that could be a real game changer. Harley-Davidson have launched an X-440 motorcycle in India. Can-Am are due to launch 2 e-bikes next year. And finally, today's discussion, it's going to be quite a long one, so that's why the news items are fairly short this week. This is about the crash I was talking about last Wednesday. Let's refer specifically to a point the Defence Council made, and he said 2 lights are better than 1. And what I'm asking is where we got that idea from and whether there's any evidence for it. So plenty to talk about today, so do stay with me to the end if you are coming in later. I do apologise for the late start this morning. Should have been on 11, but glitches I'm running about 15 minutes behind schedule. Alright, so right, without any further ado, on to today's news. What have I got to tell you about? Well, unfortunately, as I said, the opening item is a sad piece of news. 2 motorcyclists have died after crashes at 2 different racing events. The first incident, 30-year-old Dutch racer Joey van Besten, who had raced at Northwest 2000, Northwest 2000, Northwest 200. He lost his life at the International Road Racing Championship event at Imatra in Finland. Now, the IRRC Championship isn't particularly well known, although I have actually been over to Europe to see some of the events myself. The thing about them is that they take place on road circuits, so if you think Isle of Man, Northwest 200, you're not too far out. And Ben Besten, who was a 2-time IRRC Super Sport champion, he finished 3rd in the Super Bike class in 2021. Unfortunately, he is said to have collided with a pole. He crashed in the rain on the straight on the warm-up lap ahead of the 2nd Super Bike race. Meanwhile, 5 motorcycles collided at the beginning of a race at the classic motorcycle event at Snetterton on Sunday. One rider was actually confirmed dead at the scene at the circuit after he was said to have received serious injuries, and another man in his 60s was taken to the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital by air ambulance. 3 other riders had minor injuries. The dead man has not been named, but police and health and safety people are looking into the circumstances of the crash. Now, also in the news is the report from the UK's Committee on Climate Change. Now, they have told the government that there should be a halt to all new road building unless there are exceptional circumstances. Now, what is gearing up to deal with the climate crisis? You may have heard that a couple of days ago has just been confirmed as the hottest day ever on modern times, anyway, on Earth. The Climate Change Committee Chair, Lord Debden, he was speaking at Glastonbury, and he said new roads inevitably increased traffic, and that inevitably increased emissions. So if the recommendation is followed through, it will be the end for the government's road building programme. Now, former Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, he said that total vehicle mileage must be cut if the government is to meet its climate change objectives. But the current Department of Transport line is that road building is actually needed because it creates jobs, and they believe that switching to electric vehicles is the answer because it would solve pollution problems. It only wouldn't solve congestion difficulties. Debden also said it was a scandal that new homes would continue to be built that contribute to the climate change issue through poor design standards. Okay, so moving on to some industry news. Now, we've seen plenty of breakthrough stories over the last few months that would solve energy problems or revolutionise the production of batteries for electric cars. And my favourite is actually the electricity from air process. Now, that's been proven in the laboratory, and the really interesting thing here is it's not a one-off by one team. It's actually been proven now by several different teams, all using slightly different processes. So it is a real thing. The problem is moving from the laboratory scale production, which produces a few watts of power, to something which is practical for producing energy on a big scale. Now, Japanese car manufacturer Toyota, the second biggest manufacturer of cars in the world, incidentally, they say they've now made a technological breakthrough which would halve the weight, size, and cost of batteries, because they have discovered and mastered a simplified process which allows them to make solid-state batteries a lot more easily. Now, the current lithium-ion batteries are liquid-based, and Toyota was already on track to roll out cars with lighter liquid-free solid-state batteries by 2025, and that would already in itself been a significant leap forward to cut charging times and increase driving range. But on Tuesday, the company has said that it's now simplified the production of the materials that are used in these batteries, and that would halve their production costs. So the batteries, what do they deliver? Well, Toyota's a new process means that they will build batteries which are more durable, which can range up to 12,000 kilometers. Start again, 1,200 kilometers. 12,000 kilometers would be halfway around the world. 1,200 kilometers, 745 miles, and which can charge in 10 minutes or less. So big jump if they manage to pull that off. The problem, of course, being exactly the same one as for the thin air electricity generation prototypes. It's one thing to have breakthroughs at a small scale, and the problem for now is to actually get this up and working as an affordable and practical manufacturing process to build the batteries that can then be put into the cars. But Toyota seem fairly confident. They believe that they can start production of their solid-state batteries as early as 2027. Okay, so on some biking news. What have we got for you on this one? Well, you may be wondering why Triumph have rushed out their new 400cc speed and scrambler X machines in India. They're available, I think, to pre-order from today. Whilst here in the UK, which is, frankly, Triumph's spiritual home, we're going to have to wait until next year. Well, the answer is look no further than Harley-Davidson's brand new bike, the X440. Here it is. Let's zoom in. I'll have to look at a bigger picture. Now, Harley-Davidson have built this bike in collaboration with another Indian manufacturer, Hero Motor Corp, and they've actually done that machine. It's another bike which is aimed squarely at the three groups: the starter bike for new riders, a machine for those on a budget, but who still want a motorcycle with a sort of a heritage name attached to it, and more generally for those who want a bike that's capable and nimble around town, but still large enough to undertake a longer ride. Now, the X440 is powered, as you might have guessed, by a 440cc engine. It's air and oil cooled, it's fuel injected, it's single cylinder, and it puts out a fairly lovely 27 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 26 pound-feet of torque at around 4,000 RPM, and that's all delivered via a 6-speed gearbox, which frankly seems a little bit redundant again on a bike like this. Now, it will come in 3 trim levels. It's listed at the moment at the equivalent price in dollars at least, $2,800 to $3,300, depending on which colour schemes and accessories that you use. Now, it's the launch of the Harley-Davidson here, the X440, is almost certainly behind why Triumph have actually wasted no time at all in revealing their own machine and making it available to pre-order in India from this week. The X440 performance figures actually place it fairly squarely on a level playing field with competitors from Honda, Yamaha, and Royal Enfield. And what bike does get smart market features over those bikes? It does get upside down forks, for example, and it comes with dual channel ABS automatically in India. Not something that is a given. It's pretty heavy, around 181 kilos or 399 pounds dry. So add fuel to that, and it's going to go up fairly close to 200 kilos, I would imagine. And that's frankly quite a lot of weight for a 27 horsepower engine to haul around. My CP250 RS from 1980, which is sitting outside at the moment, that weighs in at, if I remember correctly, 270 pounds. So that's 120 pounds lighter. That is getting on 450 kilos lighter. And it produced 26 horsepower 40 odd years ago. So the Harley is quite chunky. And frankly, that means in a straight line shootout between the two historic name brands, the Triumph's 40 horsepower single is definitely going to leave the Harley X440 in the dust. So number one, the Triumph are launching the India first. Right. Okay. Also, what we got for you? Well, Can-Am last year announced that they were set to develop a range of electric motorcycles, and the company has, in fact, given us some information now about what's coming next. And the two bikes apparently are due to appear. Here they are. Managed to get the picture up. Or 2025. The two bikes there, you can see one has a bigger front wheel, wire wheels to it. It's likely that this machine will be sort of aimed, well, it is obviously aimed at the more off-road market, and it's called the Can-Am Origin, and this is said to be a tribute to Can-Am's motocross heritage, a dual sport model designed to take riders well beyond the city and bring new exhilaration to the street and the trail for a more modern multi-terrain experience. Now, the other bike there is the Pulse, and as you can see side by side, it has cast wheels, slightly lower looking riding position, and interestingly, the headlight is slightly different to the Origin. Gets a kind of, so I suppose you could call it a fairing, bodywork anyway around the front of the bike, and something that protects the bottom of the instrument panel there. Pulse itself, it's said to be a balanced and nimble. Oh God, I put the wrong picture up there. I might come back to that one. Pulse itself is said to be a balanced and nimble motorcycle designed to immerse riders in the elevated city and transform it into electric joyride. Whether that's true or not, it's saying, because there's a lot of detail available for the bike. But what we do know is that road tax have launched two electric motors for carts, the E10 and the E20. And since the news suggests that the bikes will be launched alongside a pair of lower powered bikes, it's just possible that this pair, the Pulse in origin, will use the high powered E20 motor, which was around 24 kilowatts, 32 horsepower, so not monstrously powerful, but not that lowly powered either. Now the E10, that power plant 48-volt motor can have an output of 7 kilowatts or 14 kilowatts, depending on whether it's using a single or double battery pack, and that makes it likely, if it's going to be dual purposed, which it would make sense, wouldn't it? Can have that big motorcycle manufacturer, the company behind them is quite sizable. That makes it possible that lower powered cart engine could end up powering the lower two powered motorcycles. And that could be electronically restricted to the sort of 11 kilowatt for the 125 learner market. Right, don't forget, if you do have any comments, questions, anything you want to ask, I've just making a real mess of things today. Do ask away. I'm always happy to answer questions. Remember, the show goes out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11, unless I have a glitch like today. Nearly always live. Occasionally recorded, and very rarely I miss a show altogether. All right, I'm still showing sort of a weak signal, so I hope this is coming up reasonably smoothly. Right, so on to the final section, today's discussion point. Now, last Wednesday I was talking about a judge who reminded a woman who'd injured a rider in a junction collision about the think once, think twice, think bike TV advert campaign from the mid-1970s. And I said that the very fact that he had to remind the defendant of this 50-year-old advert is that there's little evidence therefore that these campaigns have actually had any significant impact on these collisions. They still happen in exactly the same way as they did all those years ago. But once reading the news report on the case, one of the things I discovered was that the Defence Counsel made an unusual, interesting statement. What he said could actually be interpreted as attempting to place some blame for the collision on the motorcyclist. Mrs. Clark's Defence Counsel, Andrew Nuttall, said, quote, "There is a school of thought that says these days that one light on the motorbike is not necessarily something human beings can take in. We're not used to seeing two lights, which is one reason why motorcycles are putting two lights on," unquote. All right, so not a particularly coherent statement, in my opinion. But before I go any further, I will say that there was nothing else in the press report on the case to allow me to say whether the rider had 1, 2, 3, or millions of lights on his motorcycle. And I cannot tell you that they were illuminated or not at the time of the collision. Without hold the trial transcript itself, I simply don't know what lights were or were not in use. But from the statement, I would infer, and I think it's reasonable to do so, that the rider had the typical single headlight setup on the bike, and that light was in fact switched on. So where did the counsel, Mr. Nuttall, get his idea that two lights are better than one? Where did that come from? Where is this supposed school of thought? Well, the answer is I honestly have no idea. Now, as you probably know, thanks to science being seen, I've done quite a lot of research into motorcycle day riding lights, and what I will say is that there are many theories. There are decades of research into day riding lights, looking at anything from the size of the headlight itself, whether one light or multiple lights make it easier to detect motorcycles, whether that changes the way that they are seen at a distance, whether it changes the way they are seen in a stream of traffic. There are research studies on where position lights for best effect, and finally there are studies on whether using different coloured light motorcycles more conspicuous in a riding environment which is full of other vehicles using day light running lights. And what I would say is that there is little agreement in these studies. So let's start with Andrew Nuttall's claim that 2 lights is better than 1, in which he suggests that since cars have 2 lights, we'll see motorcycles with 2 lights. Well, the first question we have to actually ask ourselves whether the motorcycle lights would stand out, whether they would be conspicuous if we can see them. Do they have what's known as salience? Now, first thing I would say is that, as I pointed out in the past, on days when the sun is shining, motorcycle lights frequently don't stand out particularly well. But in this case, the collision actually happened, this I do know, at 3:50 PM on Friday, November the 12th. Now, the weather at the time of the incident wasn't reported either, but according to a website called weatherspot.com, which can look back at the weather in specific locations on specific days, the weather that day was a mix of showers, light rain, and drizzle. Now, what exactly what it was doing at the time of the crash, I don't know. But what I do know is that the sun would have set up in that general area at about 16:20 in the afternoon, so half an hour earlier when the crash actually happened. It would still have been daylight, but it might well have been quite gloomy, and in theory, those are the conditions where a day riding light is more likely to stand out if the motorcycle had been travelling down the road without other vehicles with lights on around it. Now, the second thing we're not told is what motorcycle involved in the crash, other than the fact it was a Yamaha. So it could have been fitted with a relatively small diameter round headlight with a conventional halogen bulb, or it could have been fitted with a much brighter LED light, perhaps with integrated day riding light. I don't know. I can't find that information. It wasn't reported. But what we do know is what the road's like. Now, the road either side of the junction is actually dead straight. It actually has a 50-mile-per-hour limit, not unconnected. So it is reasonably high speed. And the nature of the road means that the bike would almost certainly have been lined up with any vehicles following it from the perspective of the driver looking down the road before pulling out. And we happen to know, of course, that the bike was being followed by a fire appliance. Now, did that vehicle have its lights on? Probably did, since in 2011 day running lights became mandatory for all cars, and it was followed by trucks and buses in August the following year. So in order to be ready with that new legislation, manufacturers began fitting day running lights to new models some years earlier. So chances are, unless that fire engine was very old indeed, it would have had day running lights on at the time of the crash. Whether it had headlights on, again, I can't say. But my guess is that, given the function of the vehicle, I suspect it was probably likely, even though it wasn't on an emergency shout at the time. And if that's the case, it's always possible, of course, that the bike's headlight could have lined up directly with one of the fire engine's headlights. It does actually happen. So, all right, if that didn't produce the effect that the rider must have been hoping for, the second question is, would 2 lights have been any better than 1 as claimed by her defence counsel? Well, here's the very simple problem. It's called angular separation. It's effectively it's the distance that 2 objects appear to be apart when viewed at a distance from the observer. So fairly obviously, when you start with something which is fairly close together, like this Honda VFR 800, the headlights there, which are already close together behind a single shield, the further away you get, the more those lights are going to merge into each other. And this is where the next factor comes in. Remember, this collision happened on a road with a 50-mile-per-hour speed limit. What this means, of course, is that drivers will look further down the road because they're not stupid. They do know roughly how fast vehicles travel on the road that they're pulling out onto. They know roughly how far away they need to look. So the chances are that the bike was some distance away at the time that the driver looked in the motorcycle's direction. So there's a significant chance that the 2 lights, if they had been 2 lights on the bike, would have blended into one anyway. Okay, so what else can we say about the crash? Well, we know it happened on the road at the speed limit, assuming the bike was travelling at about the speed limit, and there was no suggestion from the Defence Council that the bike was speeding, which I'm sure that they would have used immediately if the rider had been over the limit. And that means the rider is covering between 22 and 23 meters per second. Now, when looked but did not see errors like this happen, the cut-off from collision studies, this is the cut-off when the rider ceases to avoid the crash when the driver makes the did not see error, appears to be around 3 seconds out from the point of collision. Further away than 3 seconds, rider gets it stopped or swerves. Closer than 3 seconds, things go pear-shaped. So this would have put the bike around 65 meters away, and I'm really not convinced that any pair of headlights, with the possible exception of a widely separated R1 set of lights, would have appeared distinctively separate at this kind of distance. And anyway, does that mean that we're going to identify twin lights as a bike? I have no idea where the council got that idea from. I would have thought that if you are distinctively producing twin lights, people are more likely on a day with relatively gloomy visibility to think that it's a motorcycle, a motor car rather than a motorcycle. Anyway, next question. We'd be using dip beam as day riding lights on most motorcycles, wouldn't we? So let's have a look at the beam pattern of a typical headlight. Now, this is for a car, I will admit, but there's no reason to assume that motorcycle dip lights are any different. Remember the distance I just mentioned, that the error would happen somewhere around about the 65 meter or closer mark. Have a look at the diagram there and look at the distance the light is cast down the road. The bulk of the dip beam falls within 40 meters of the vehicle projecting the light. If anything, it's possibly a bit more dramatic for a motorcycle, because if you think motorcycle headlights are a bit higher, the dip beam cut off has to be rather sharper. But the further light pattern goes down the road is probably 75 meters. So very not much further than the bike itself. So that's where the light is shone. It's shone below the eye level of the driver sitting in the car. That, remember, is the light falling on the surface. The car driver is actually sitting up in a vehicle. So the distances involved are even shorter than that diagram suggests. Basically, what you're hoping reaches the driver's light is poor the focus, like the light scatter from the lens. The focus light from a low beam, the dip beam, is aimed at the ground. So the chances of very much of the light from even a twin headlight setup reaching the driver are actually relatively small. So, crucial question. Is there any evidence that day riding lights on motorcycles actually work, whether they're one beam, two beams, low beam, or whether they are the more scattered, diffuse day riding lights that we're starting to see fitted around the headlight of modern motorcycles now? Anecdotally, I've had far too many reports of drivers when the rider says, I had the lights on, but she still pulled out in front of me, to have much faith personally in day riding lights. And as a personal exercise, I turned my lights off back in the early 2000s when it was suggested that I might like to try and see what happened, and I did. And after riding with my lights on since my very earliest days on a bike, when it was actually uncommon to ride with lights on, what did I discover? Well, I couldn't detect any change in the way drivers responded to my motorcycle. Now, this conflicts, of course, with the numerous statements that we would read from road safety organisations, in the popular biking press, all over the web, and even in some less than credible research papers that argue that dipped headlights do reduce collisions. But those claims, having looked at the studies, are often based on laboratory work, where they basically put a photograph in front of a subject and ask them if they can see the bike or not, and some poor quality evidence from the roads. Now, to settle the debate once and for all, what we would really need to know is the accident data to answer a couple of questions. how many riders have had looked but failed to see collisions whilst riding with lights on, and how many riders have had looked but failed to see collisions whilst riding without lights on. And then we would have the baseline to work out whether lights really affected the collision rate or not. As far as I know, and I am open to correction if anybody knows better, we simply don't have that data. I've looked, I can't find it. The list I can find is from the Pan-European Motorcycle Accident In-Depth Study of Motorcycle Crashes, the so-called MAIDS study. That's a few years old now, but what it found was that in collisions where the primary contributing factor was the failure of another vehicle operator to detect the motorcycle, headlights were in use for 69% of those crashes. So basically, over 2/3 of all the bikes involved in these look failed to see collisions, the riders had their lights on. Now, we don't know the overall proportion of riders who were using daytime riding lights at the time of the study, which means we still can't say whether those collisions were distributed evenly between riders using DRLs and riders who weren't using DRLs, or whether the DRLs gave the riders using lights some positive protection. But what is evident from that study is that large numbers of motorcycles with lights on were still not being seen by other road users. So there's one other study that is quite useful, and this is what happened when new legislation forced riders to switch on their headlights in daytime in Malaysia. Now, because it was a change in the law, what it meant was it required overnight compliance. Basically, the day before the law came in, you could ride around without your headlight on. The day after, you had to ride around with your headlight on. So you had a choice beforehand. Afterwards, you had no choice. Now, the study suggested that the rate of compliance of motorcyclists using lights in daytime actually rose. It went up 1%, but the overall reduction in collisions in the period immediately after the law came in was only around about 7%. And of the studies I have looked at, which have tried to measure before and after effects, the most optimistic suggested that around 20% of looked but failed to see collisions are actually prevented. The most pessimistic suggested only 2% of these collisions were prevented when the lights were switched on as opposed to when they weren't switched on. So even if we got a benefit of say 10% from riding without lights on, what that means is of course that 9 riders out of 10 would still have crashes. So do day riding lights have the benefit of making us more conspicuous? Possibly. Do they have a big benefit in terms of rider safety? No, they don't. As ever, if you want to find out more, the place to go is to my Science of Being Seen.org website. And if you want to find out a little bit more about what I just talked about, you can head here and find the relevant page. Steve says he's getting worse in groups. Grams of 3, poor quality. I do hope it improves, Steve. Unfortunately, I can't hear myself. I don't get feedback as to what it sounds like. So I'm hoping for the best. If it has come over, I will maybe try recording the show offline and then posting up later and replacing the live broadcast. So if you have been watching and you've been getting crappy reception this morning, I do apologise. It's not my fault as far as I can see. Everything is plugged in as it should be. The only thing I can assume is this is a problem at the server end where I upload the show to, which then sends out to Facebook and to YouTube. Right, that is all for today anyway, and hopefully quality will improve next time on. If you, as I say, if it has proven to be awful, I will re-record the show. Right, that's it. Thanks for looking in. And don't forget, if you're out there riding today, do stay